It was a cold night. Nothing but the sounds of heavy footsteps and crying.
On the day of September 7, 1944, a few months after the Germans arrived, the Nazi soldiers were still on the prowl to look for every last Jew.
The Nazi soldier wasn't able to open the door. With a few shots of his machine gun, he finally enters the house.
In the dim light emanating from the moon, an intimidating man appeared, blocking the only way in and out of the house.
This man had a helmet, a gun, and wore a face of disgust. On his uniform was a symbol that looked like a hooked cross.
The soldiers that followed up behind him started to loot the household.
The family that was in the house was forced to line up outside. These lines led to a truck full of people.
These people were then put into living areas called ghettos. The living spaces in these areas were scarce.
The conditions within the ghettos were very poor. People were on top of each other, and there wasn't a step you could take without stepping on a person.
Due to poor and unsanitary conditions, people started to get sick.
A few weeks passed, and the conditions remained unchanged, even when they were moved to the trains.
They were then heading to the concentration camps with no knowledge of what was coming their way.
When they arrived at the camps, they were forced to wear identical clothing and were assigned numbers. They were confused as to what was happening.
A few months passed, and more people filled the camp. Conditions still have not changed. In fact, it got worse.
They watched as their family disappeared, one by one, into what the soldiers said were showers.
Little did the Jews know they weren't entering those chambers to take a shower.
The sounds of the screams could even be heard from through the iron doors.
Gas filled the room, and the scratching and banging of the people were echoed in the chambers.
After a while, silence filled the empty spaces of the chambers, while the sounds of the screaming and banging lingered in the minds of all the other victims, who were forced to clean up the remains of their own.
One by one, the bodies were piled up on top of one another to be burnt into ashes. The sight was unbearable. Even spending hours clearing the bodies, one would still not get used to the stench.
Outside, it appeared as though black snow was falling from the sky. However, it was the ashes from the bodies that were burnt through the process.
July 1st, 1863, a very important battle took place during the Civil War.
There are 23,049 casualties, 3,155 deaths, 14,529 wounded, 5,365 missing on the Union side.
On the Confederate side, there were 28,063 casualties, 3,903 dead, 18,735 wounded, and 5,425 missing.
Day 1. Fights were fought on the McPherson's Bridge, Oak Hill, Oak Ridge, Seminary Ridge, Barlow's Knoll.
On the first day, 50,000 soldiers were deployed to the battlefield. On this day, 15,500 of the 50,000 were killed.
Day 2. Fights at this day were fought at Devil's Den, Little Round Top, the Wheat Field, the Peach Orchard, Cemetery Ridge, Trossel's Farm, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill.
On the second day, there were roughly 100,000 soldiers, of which roughly 20,000 were killed, wounded, captured, or missing.
By the end of the day, going into July 3rd, 1863, a charge was set up. This became known as Pickett's Charge.
Made up of about 12,000 soldiers, this was not the largest charge in the Civil War.
In fact, the Franklin Charge, held by the Confederates, contained about 20,000 soldiers.
Many lives were lost, even though this was not a large-scale battle, but it is said to be the costliest of them all.
On February 17th, 1897, the Spanish started to capture even more territories within the Philippines.
With no intent of giving up their land, the Filipinos decided to stop the Spanish in their tracks, hoping to end their motives.
The general of the Filipino side, Emilio Aguinaldo, then decided that their objective was to keep the Spaniards from getting to Cavite.
General Aguinaldo concluded this due to the traveling patterns that the Spaniards were taking, and Cavite was surely the next on the Spaniards' list.
The Filipinos decided to intercept the Spaniards on the Zapote Bridge in Bacoor.
However, due to the large amount of soldiers the Spaniards had, Aguinaldo's army could not fight the Spaniards face to face.
Their only option was to set up a trap, so the army was tasked to put up dynamites under the bridge along with bamboo sticks on the river below.
On the day of the battle, Aguinaldo's army of 10,000 would hide behind the bushes close to the river, hoping to catch the Spaniards off guard.
The Spaniards were led by Camilo de Pavieja. He was a great leader, but even he couldn't predict that the Filipinos would set up a trap.
Hours later, General Camilo de Pavieja crossed the bridge along with 12,000 men that followed behind him.
The trap was activated. Bodies scattered. The debris and rubble shot into the air, injuring those near the blast, not long after the debris settled, and the bridge was no longer there.
The smell of blood and gunpowder filled the air, along with the groans and moans of the injured.
Those who were unfortunate ended up being pierced by some bamboo sticks. Blood filled the river, giving it a very dark red color.
A moment was taken before Aguinaldo's army engaged, because the shock of the blast also took a toll on some of his soldiers.
The soldiers fought hand to hand until sundown. As the Spaniards retreated, dead soldiers lay on the battlefield.
The Filipinos ended up with 450 casualties and 900 wounded.
The Spanish side had 441 casualties, 870 wounded, and 313 were captured by the Aguinaldo army.